On August 15, Kenya's presidential election was declared won by William Ruto, despite a split within the Electoral Commission over the declared result, which showed the vice president had received 50.5% of the vote, defeating longtime opposition leader Raila Odinga and narrowly avoiding a runoff. He is the leader of the Kenya Kwanza, Kenya First, coalition party, the United Democratic Alliance. He is Kenya's first sitting deputy president to succeed the incumbent following competitive elections, and the first candidate to win the presidency on his first try. Kenya's Supreme Court upheld the victory of Ruto in the election, after ruling on a number of petitions brought by his challenger, Raila Odinga. Ruto won despite sustained opposition from the incumbent, Uhuru Kenyatta, a former ally who chose to support his former archrival and longtime opposition leader, Raila Odinga. Ruto campaigned for Kenyatta during his first presidential bid, which he lost in 2002. The International Criminal Court, ICC, indicted both as the suspected masterminds of the mass atrocities that followed the disputed 2007 elections. They then joined forces to compete in 2013. They won again in 2017, but not before the Supreme Court overturned the first round. However, following their spat, Ruto portrayed Kenyatta and Odinga as embodiments of dynastic politics and entitlement. The two are the sons of Kenya's first president and first vice president, Jomo Kenyatta and Oginga Odinga, respectively. Ruto, in some ways, triumphed over the state, powerful elites, a biased media, the intelligentsia, civil society, and skewed polling firms. His victory is both historic and incredible. Ruto was pushed out by the establishment as an outlier in Kenya's political power matrix, which is dominated by a tiny clique linked by familial and economic ties and adept at manipulating tribalism to capture the state. However, he has retreated by appealing directly to the masses, his original constituency. For nearly 6 decades, political and economic power has been centered on Kenya's first 2 presidents, Kenyatta and Daniel Arap Moi. Raila Odinga joined this group in the sunset years of Moi's tenure and counted on it to propel him to power in the just concluded elections. The group has leverage over state agencies and the security apparatus. It uses state power to advance commercial interests that span Kenya's entire economy. Kenyatta's family, for example, has extensive business interests. The Mois are also extremely wealthy. Ruto has accused these families of state capture, or of using their control over the state to enrich themselves in the most primitive way possible. Ruto is unquestionably a wealthy man. According to his political opponents, he, too, has extensive business interests. Ruto has been accused of hypocrisy for championing the oppressed, or ordinary Kenyans whom he refers to as hustlers. Ruto's bottom-up economic model was central to his campaign. Its pillars are the dispersal of economic and political opportunities and dignifying the poor. It calls for equity, inclusion, social justice, and fair play. His Hustler Nation movement was fueled by widespread unemployment, poverty, inequalities, and state excesses like extrajudicial executions and rampant corruption. Ruto has successfully reinvented himself as an agent of class consciousness, which has previously been lacking in Kenya's political discourse and competition. His messaging resonated with a cross-section of the marginalized by rebranding himself as the antithesis of the status quo and personification of the poor's hopes. As the victor, he has his work cut out for him. To pacify Kenya's discontented and disenchanted populace, he will need to rebuild the country's socio-economic and political structures. He must provide leadership that will rid Kenyan society of tribalism and instill civic values and national identity. If he doesn't, he risks becoming a victim of his own success. Following disputed elections in 2017, Kenyatta and his close allies launched a smear campaign against Ruto. He was quickly pushed out of the government and only served as Kenyatta's principal legal assistant. Kenyatta delegated his official duties as deputy president to a loyal cabinet minister in an attempt to shrink the office and cut Ruto's political wings. The goal was to delegitimize and frustrate him into resigning, thereby eliminating him from the succession race. Ruto exhibited resilience despite the frustrations. In Kenya's media, including social media, Ruto was the villain, the bogeyman. He was cynically portrayed in newspaper headlines, hashtags, and prime-time news and talk shows as the skunk of Kenyan politics, solely associated with vices such as corruption, land grabs, impunity, unbridled ambition, insolence, warlord politics, and ethnic cleansing. He took advantage of this sense of victimhood. However, these vices pervade Kenya's political landscape, and the depiction was influenced more by partisanship than moral rectitude. His accusers aren't much better. Ruto began his political career in the early 1990s as a protégé of long-serving autocrat Daniel Arap Moi. When Moi faced presidential opponents for the first time in 1992, he mobilized the youth vote with the help of young politicians from a group called Youth for KANU 92. Ruto was one of the young politicians who devised the successful, but also infamous, 1992 re-election strategy. Moi approved the printing of money used to bribe voters, among other things. Ruto's election to parliament in 1997 defied his mentor. Moi, a fellow Rift Valley Kalenjin, had tried to persuade Ruto not to run. Ruto deftly captured the Kalenjin voting bloc and used it as a springboard into national politics. Moi had intended to leave it to his son, Gideon. Hence the fallout between Moi and Ruto. Fearing that he would end their economic and political stranglehold, the Kenyatta-Moi Odinga axis, which Ruto has previously supported, turned against him. They saw Ruto, who was relatively young, perceptive, ambitious, foresight, and gallant, as a threat to their dubious privileges. Now that Ruto has won the presidency, only time will tell whether their concerns were justified. Ruto stood out from this clique in 2010, mobilizing against the passage of the current constitution. He later defended his position by claiming that while he did not agree with some aspects of the constitution, he embraced it once it was passed. He rebuked Kenyatta for flagrantly disregarding numerous court orders and weaponizing oversight bodies and state agencies against Ruto and his allies in violation of the same constitution. Ruto also accused Kenyatta and Odinga of a conspiracy to illegally amend the constitution to consolidate their power and entrench ethnicity through the Building Bridges initiative. The attempt was declared unconstitutional by the High Court, the Appeals Court, and finally the Supreme Court. Despite his rhetoric, Ruto is a product of Kenya's political culture, which is notorious for its lack of moral fiber. Its elite are Anglophile in outlook and dismissive of the poor. It is also plagued by impunity and tribalism. What is significant is that Ruto's reframe of the political debate into hustlers versus dynasties has given him traction, helped him win the presidency, and set the tone for this election despite the outgoing government's dismal performance. He made the election about the rule of law, constitutionalism, equalizing economic opportunities for the poor and marginalized, and political competition based on intersecting social and economic interests. In contrast, Odinga publicly defined himself as the status quo candidate, a continuation of Kenyatta's tenure seeking to preserve the exclusive political and economic arrangement dating back to colonialism. It was a decision that cost him the presidency on his fifth try. For Kenyans, the stakes are high. The Ruto victory has broken the back of Kenya's dynastic dominance in politics and the economy. As he reorganizes Kenya's state and politics, peripheral actors will emerge. It remains to be seen whether Ruto will keep his lofty promises and open up the economy for the benefit of all. Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more stories.